In Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, there's a line spoken by Master Mace Windu during the meeting between the members of the Jedi Council and Chancellor Palpatine about the growing numbers of planets joining the Separatists. Windu states that if it comes to war, there weren't enough Jedi to protect the Republic. They're keepers of the peace, not soldiers. And there's certainly a noble intent behind this statement, and it's definitely true that the Republic couldn't be protected by the Jedi alone if it came to war. There's only so many of them. But unfortunately, overall, we have determined that statement was a lie. I'm sure the way the Jedi see it, their hope would be that their presence can deter further conflict, letting them act as peacekeepers in most situations, but when it comes to galactic-scale war, as Mace says, there's not enough of them to fully protect the Republic, let alone enough to deter conflict completely. We'll be talking about the in-universe background of this, but I think there's also a fairly simple, real-world reason for this approach which we'll cover at the end of the video. If we look throughout galactic history, we actually see one particular trend. The Jedi are soldiers in almost every single war the galaxy sees, and in many cases they're even the ones leading the charge or starting the war. The most famous example we have is, of course, the Clone Wars, where the Jedi are maneuvered into engaging as both soldiers and military leaders for the Republic by Palpatine. The Republic's lack of a formal military probably had a lot to do with this, with no obvious command structure in place already, except for limited judicial forces and some sector and planetary defense forces throughout the Republic. The Jedi's experience and training as warriors made them the obvious choice for command to fall to. But with that being said, we know similar things have happened throughout the Republic's history from its earliest days. The Republic was founded after something called the Unification Wars. While these were basically never explored in any detail directly, we do know the Jedi were on the winning side, probably allied with another Force order called the Bendu Monks, and likely fighting against a despotic warlord named Zachariand Minus. But the Jedi involvement is very much highlighted as an important element. This starts a relationship which is, in my opinion, pretty key to the fact that the Jedi keep ending up as soldiers, rather than really just being peacekeepers. Generally, when you're talking about peacekeepers, you're talking about third-party, non-aligned, non-combatants within a conflict, whose presence is supposed to discourage the outbreak of violence. You can point to criticisms of this framework like the potential for peacekeepers to effectively represent one side directly by protecting the status quo, and you can see that as a good or bad thing, but it's at least the framework within which you are technically designating yourself if you're calling yourselves peacekeepers. The Jedi always end up being entirely tied up within the political structure of the Republic, however. There may be periods where they see themselves as more or less independent, but in almost all circumstances, they are agents of the Republic operating in its interests. The argument they may make, and sometimes do make, is that the Republic's stability is necessary for peace in the galaxy, but that argument isn't far off from what a national military would say either. If they're working for the Republic, and if in any conflict which may come up they end up defending the Republic's interests, then they are effectively just a different variety of soldier, especially when they so regularly get integrated directly within the Republic's command structure, giving them the power to order their troops to like this video and subscribe for more. There are a few points within history where this went as far as the Republic military, other institutions, or the Republic as a whole effectively being an extension of the Jedi Order. One example of this followed the Pious Crusades, where a humanocentric cult took over the Republic, led by a series of chancellors named Contispecs for hundreds of years. This ended with one of the wars where the Jedi didn't actually act as an instrument of Republic policy. Contispecs I became Chancellor of the Republic in 11,987 BBY, or years before the Battle of Yavin, and engaged in his first crusade in 11,965. But it wasn't until 11,933 that the Jedi Order officially recused itself from the Republic, retreating to its own academies on planets like Ossus. But even in this situation, the Jedi didn't actively oppose the Republic in what it was doing. They mostly closed their eyes to the atrocities, while a select few acted against the Pious Day Republic in opposition to the Order's policy. Some did even support the Pious Day directly, splintering off and forming a new order, the Order of the Terrible Glare. But when the Pious Day were finally taken down, it happened with heavy involvement of the Jedi Order, cooperating with rebels led by the planet Alsacon, and institutions within the Republic, like the Bureau of Ships and Services, also known as the Galactic DMV. This left the Jedi not just reintegrated within the Republic, but directly in charge of it. The government that was set up after taking down Contispecs XIX was run by Supreme Chancellor Bile Ductavis, who was also the Grand Master of the Jedi Order. Nearly 9,000 years later, this happened once again, and then multiple times again and again, as between 1400 BBY and 1000 BBY, every single Chancellor of the Republic was also a Jedi. This happened during the New Sith Wars, a millennium-long conflict which ran from 2000 to 1000 BBY. This war between the Republic and a new Sith Empire saw the Republic get slowly eroded by the Sith and their allies, leading to everyone losing faith in the Republic and the Jedi taking more and more power, to the point of even establishing hereditary lordships for themselves. The most prominent of these was Lord Hoth, who led the Jedi Army, the Army of Light, in the final years of the war, years in the Republic which were actually overseen by the first non-Jedi Chancellor in centuries, Tarsis Valorum. And when I say Jedi Army, I do mean Jedi Army. These lords had established themselves fighting to free sectors from various threats, as the Republic otherwise had seemed to become ineffectual, so the army that existed at that time was an army which primarily belonged to the Jedi, not the Republic. This is the farthest we really see the Jedi go in this direction, but it's also fairly indicative of some of the other wars in the prior few thousand years of Republic history. In many of the Republic's wars in the last third or so of its life, the Sith were the primary enemy, and the Jedi played no small part in instigating and executing these wars. Like with the former example of the Jedi using their power to free sectors from Sith rule, which often meant freeing worlds and sectors from slavery, you could certainly argue they were doing the right thing, but it's still a very different situation from just being peacekeepers instead of soldiers for the Republic. But the Clone Wars also weren't the only time the lack of an effective military in the Republic posed a difficult question for the Jedi on what their role in the galaxy ought to be. The Mandalorian Wars were arguably an even bigger example. The Mandalorians started their 2-decade crusade preying on outlying systems, with minimal response from the Republic or the Jedi at first. As the Republic stepped up its own response, the Jedi Order decided to remain uninvolved, thinking that the risk of fighting a war drawing them to the dark side outweighed the good they could do in the war. This nearly split the Order in half, as many, led by a Jedi named Revan, believed the Jedi were leaving people to suffer helpless. Revan ended up leading the war against the Mandalorians for the Republic, aided by many of those Jedi, and like in the Clone Wars, a lot of them ended up holding official positions within the Republic military. For all the good they may have done, they also showed the Jedi Council may have been right in their warning. Revan and many of his followers fell to the dark side, leading to yet another war between the Sith and the Jedi, where the Jedi whom had sat out the Mandalorian Wars were forced to engage once again, fighting as soldiers of the Republic, willingly or otherwise, to take down Revan's Sith. Though it's also possible, had the Order as a whole joined the Mandalorian Wars, Revan's influence when he fell wouldn't have been quite as high, and the Jedi Civil War could have been avoided. So there's a lot of parallels between the Knights of the Old Republic period and the Clone Wars period with respect to the discourse around the Jedi's involvement, but another similarity is that in both cases, the end result was a massive Jedi purge. Possibly an even bigger one than what we saw in the Clone Wars with Order 66, though I've covered that in a separate video. So while the Jedi may see themselves as peacekeepers rather than soldiers, it's hard to avoid the fact that they didn't do a great job maintaining that separation, and most of the time they ended up just being soldiers anyways. When Luke Skywalker reformed the Jedi Order after Endor, it's something he struggled with as well, and many of the people serving in the Jedi Order under him also struggled with. Firstly, since the prior order had been destroyed, when Luke was recruiting, he tended to have to train people who were already more established in their lives and careers, which ended up including a lot of career military service people who remained in many of their posts after joining the order as well. Compared to this, very few of the toddlers that the old Jedi Order had taken in probably had established careers. When the Yuuzhan Vong attacked the Star Wars galaxy, Luke, like the Jedi Council during the Mandalorian Wars, wasn't sure how to engage in the war without also risking falling to the dark side. Ultimately, his order ended up even more tied to the New Republic of its day than the Jedi of the Clone Wars or Old Republic, though. When he made his inaugural Jedi Council, it was half Jedi and half New Republic advisors, including the Chief of State. He ultimately made the choice to allow Jedi to engage in the war however they saw fit, but it was only after long deliberation, and the Vong demonstrating themselves to be a significant threat to all life in the galaxy, along with coming to his own determination on what acting in defense really meant. But after this war, he did split up the Jedi from the New Republic, which had become the Galactic Alliance, more than it had been in the past. Really though, I think a lot of this comes down to one much more simple out-of-universe fact. The Jedi are superheroes with cool swords. So ultimately, when you're making media about them, people want the cool sword fights. Ergo, you end up telling stories about wars and you want the Jedi to be heavily involved in that. Let me know what you think though. Do the Jedi live up to their claim of being peacekeepers rather than soldiers? And maybe, just as interestingly, are they wrong to? That's going to do it for today's episode though. I hope you've enjoyed it. Special thanks to the patrons whose names you're seeing on screen for their support, making this channel possible, and to Marmar for editing this video.